Are here and no one is safe. Southwest Airlines is slashing 1,750 jobs. Chevron's cutting a staggering 8,000 employees. And Meta is dropping 3,600 workers. But these numbers pale in comparison to what's happening in the federal government, where over 100,000 government jobs are on the chopping block. The question just isn't who's next. It's what's next. Today we're diving into the psychological fallout for those laid off, for the survivors still clocking in, and for the managers left to clean up the mess. Today on Off the Couch. And welcome to Off the Couch, where psychology meets everyday life. I'm Dr. Greg Case, on psychologist, joined by producer Brian Gomez.
Happy Monday, you guys.
And also we have Noah on the board today.
How's it going, everyone?
Hey, Noah. Noah, have you ever been laid off? Fired?
No, I haven't. I've
Kicked
actually
to the
been
curb?
a pretty good worker. I've been fortunate.
Oh, well, it doesn't always matter if you're a good worker. A lot of good people are still laid off and cut from their jobs. But yeah, well, that's a good thing about being young. Yeah, I will say. But so today we're going to dive right in. This is the topic dominating everyone's discussion. It's dominating our news feeds. We're seeing all the stories. This is constantly coming up. But let's just talk about the federal workforce layoffs just to begin with. This is from USA Today. So these numbers are bound to continue to climb. But just as of November 2024, approximately 3 million people were on the federal payroll. 600,000 plus people work for the U.S. Postal Service, and that's beyond the 3 million. So, I mean, we have a huge amount. Actually, the federal government ends up being the largest employer in the United States, surpassing Walmart and Amazon. How about that? The Department of Veterans Affairs alone has 48,600 employees. The Veterans Health Administration is the largest sector in the VA. The smallest department, can you guess what the smallest department is? Brian, can you guess what the smallest one? Oh, you're looking at the graph.
Yeah,
you aren't going to be able to figure
it
it out because the smallest one isn't even up there. What can you guess? You can do a process of deduction. For those listening at home, we just put up a graph on of all the workforces in the federal employees. But what do you think is the smallest department? What's the one that's been making all the news that they think is so evil? It's the Department of Education.
Oh, I'm like, there's so many.
That only has It only has 4,245 people. It's actually rather small for considering the size of, we have schools in the entire United States. We have 330 plus million people. I mean, we're kind of a big nation. We're very big.
Does that kind of show why, society isn't as smart because it's such a small department?
No, I think there are many other reasons for why society isn't as smart as it could be, but thinks it is. That's a whole different discussion. That's a Dunning-Kruger effect. And we'll have to come back to that another time. That's when people think they're smarter than they actually are. Okay, so where do federal employees live? Everyone thinks they live in Washington, D.C. Actually, 80% of federal employees live outside of the Washington, D.C. metro area. Actually, close to about 450,000 people live in the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area. That's the area that feeds the federal government in the Washington, D.C. area. So that is a lot of people. But the largest state by federal workforce can you guess the largest state?
Isn't California?
It is because it's the biggest state. It's kind of dumb. It's all the biggest states have the biggest amount of people. The bigger the state, the more the federal employees. But when you look at per capita, it's kind of interesting because California is really low when you compare it to other states, like where federal employees are about 1% of Montana's population. It's only about 0.3 of California's. So it's actually low down there. So it's just kind of cool when you look at it. Okay, the departments affected by layoffs. I actually think this is really interesting because the Internal Revenue Service, actually I have 6,000 here, but I think it's now approaching 7,000 layoffs that they're estimating for the IRS.
So what would that happen with like our income taxes and all that?
Ain't going to touch a thing. Ain't going to mean a thing. What it's going to mean, because they actually they're going to still go after the low guy. They're going to still say, you owe money, and they're going to still come after you and send you bills. A lot of that's automated. But what they won't do is have people to answer the phones when you have a problem or deal with things. And what it's also going to mean is they won't have enough investigators to go after the big cheats. And the big cheats are the ones who really advocated to have the IRS cut. So the big cheats are like the big, people with a lot of money. This is a regressive type thing, because the Internal Revenue Service is trying to bring in money to the United States, so it's counterintuitive. But when you know what they're trying to do is protect wealthy people, it makes a lot more sense. Department of Defense, 5,400 layoffs. I don't know. I guess the world's safer now suddenly. Now that we've joined the axis of evil? I don't know. And then the Department of Homeland Security has 400 layoffs. And they're always squawking about that one. So it's just kind of interesting. So we could go down the line. There are actually a lot of very concerning things. But what I wanted to do today was to talk about the psychological effects of being laid off or fired. You've never been laid off. What about you, Brian?
I have, and it's recent too.
Okay.
Yeah, in October for me.
And tell me, what did you feel?
And it's funny because you know how you asked Noah, and he said he's a great worker. I've learned that it's not about just being a great worker. It's just what's happening. The company I worked for, wasn't making enough money to have like an extra paralegal on hand. So it was just, it's budget cuts that happen. That it's like I was the newest one and everything too. So. Yeah.
That is a very real thing. That is a very real thing. And you can work at an organization. I worked at a college where we had layoffs. I'll talk about that because I was on the other side of it. I was actually notified by management. But I've worked at two organizations where I was notified by management beforehand. They wanted me to be prepared because they have a layoff coming on X day. And this is what they want, they wanted from other managers to do. To help deal with it. Yeah. And so, it's kind of hard to be on that side of it because they don't really tell you what to do. But today I actually found good research about what to do. So I think that's going to help a little bit. But I've also been fired. I was fired from a bookstore and fired from an ice cream store. So I had big issues with the bookstore one because I thought that was a very unfair firing. And the ice cream store, probably I deserved it. Shame on me.
I've been fired when I was younger too. Like when you're young, I feel like it's normal. Like, and it was from a burger joint. Well, two burger joints. And they were right to fire me as well.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing, it's just all very odd. But the bottom line is that firing does bring on a lot of problems. The problems with people in these big jobs, though, they're much bigger jobs, and these are career jobs. These are people who are putting their heart and soul into things. I was watching a guy from the NOAA. NOAA does the NOAA, does National Oceanic area. I don't know what the name of the organization, but the bottom line is they do weather. They look at weather and they look at oceans. They're like our people that we depend on to tell us about what's going on in the world. They're having massive layoffs, and this guy's saying it was his whole dream. He wanted to be a meteorologist since he was 8, and here he is working in this organization, helping predict the weather, helping to look at natural disasters, and they just cut him off unceremoniously, saying he didn't meet their needs. And he's like, that wasn't the case. The case was he was a probationary employee, and that ends up being, they're just basically going for low-hanging fruit, who they can fire without any kind of legal repercussion right now, and they'll probably go after others later. But immediate emotional reactions when you do get laid off, shock and disbelief, and fired too. Like usually people are not expecting it. Even when you know a layoff is coming, you kind of think you won't be the one. I think that's a very natural human thing. So shock and disbelief. And actually that shock and disbelief helps you so you can kind of keep your composure as you do things like pack up your stuff and be able to leave. And start to deal with things and, whatever you need to do. But that kind of helps you in that very difficult time. But then you start to feel anger and resentment. That comes usually pretty shortly thereafter. Did you feel that, Brian?
Yep. Yeah, I feel like you saw it too. Like you saw me deal with it a little bit where, yeah, it sucks. Nobody wants to be laid off, and like most people aren't really prepared to be like, just jump into a new job, especially when it's unexpected.
No, and there's an economic reality to that. I'm not going to even talk about economic reality, but is one of the biggest issues, because when we don't have economic security, almost everything else is hard to do when we don't have security. And most people are living paycheck to paycheck. I'm embarrassed to say, count myself among them.
Same. I learned if you're listening, save money, get a savings account.
Yeah, no, I'm in a better position than, certainly perhaps you, or certainly the 30-year-old self, or my 40-year-old self, or my 50-year-old self. So, I could say I'm in a better position, but I've always had that, kind of just what you need to do, what you need to do. Pay rent, food, car, blah, 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 blah. So you feel anger and resentment, and that actually ends up being a healthy negative emotion, because what that generally helps people do is to be able to start to take action. But if they start to fill with rage, it can go the opposite way, and they start to do things to thwart their previous employer. And then we talk about going postal. I worry about that for federal workforce right now. Do you know what going postal is?
I was going to ask you that.
Neither of you know?
No. Is this an old people term?
It is an old people term. I can't believe it. I'm so shocked. So going postal was, back in the day, there was a whole bunch of, at the time, postal workers who were getting fired or laid off, and some of them went back and shot up their previous workplace. So that they started to call it going postal, and then they had other examples of it from the corporate world and things, but that term held. They still said going postal for when people go back in and shoot up the place or to shoot their previous manager. It's a bit like a school shooting, excuse me, where they go after the previous person.
That's insane. I had never heard of that, but do you think that would be something that would happen? Because, it's happening.
I don't think it'll happen on a wide basis, but I do think it has the danger of happening because they're not doing things in a very helpful way. There are ways to do it to mitigate damage. So if you start to get somebody who's psychologically predisposed to blame others and then doesn't see any kind of normal or helpful coping mechanism. Sorry, I don't know what's suddenly happening here. That they will start to, I feel like that teacher you had in school who suddenly got a bubble in her throat. And then she was talking and the whole class is distracted by that weird tone she has in her throat. You don't hear a word out of her mouth. Do you know this?
Yes.
Yes. So anyway, that's me. So I do believe, what was I saying? I got distracted by my own bubble.
About the postal shootings.
Yeah.
And you don't think it's going to happen?
I don't think it's going to happen on a wide scale, but I do think we need to be concerned because there are people who do have, let's say, higher levels of paranoia and externalization of blame and may not have good coping mechanisms. So they use, let's say, destroying others as part of their blame. Remember, we look at anger as someone else did something wrong. They're a bad person for having done it, and they need to be punished or taught a lesson. That third one can escalate in quite a big way. Punished or taught a lesson could be, I'm going to write a bad letter or put a negative review on Glassdoor, but a punished or taught a lesson could escalate to the most vile thing.
Well, we saw Luigi with the,
That would be an example of,
CEO.
Yes, I wouldn't call that going postal because he wasn't an employee, but he was someone who's affected.
Gotcha.
I'm going to put in a lozenge. Thank you. So I have a better thing. Okay. Example, a high-level achiever may struggle with identity after layout, and that's because they also start to feel embarrassment and shame. So You feel embarrassed and shame, and once you stop blaming others, you start to look at yourself, and then you think, is it me? Am I the bad person here? Is it how I smell, what I look like, what I do?
Well, the stigma behind it as well, even how when Noah brought it up, like it sounds like, you messed up and they like fired you for a reason, when we really know that layoffs aren't like that. But it does affect you where it's like, what did I do? Like, what did I mess up so bad that I couldn't, stay on?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's the answer? I don't know. Or you look at small things, but your mind is all constantly going and back and forth. So we get filled with all these problems, and then you start to probably feel this psychological stuff, the anxiety and stress. What's the future hold? Can I get another job? How am I going to pay these bills? Am I going to be able to stay in this apartment? How am I going to pay my kids' child care, et cetera, et cetera? That starts to really ramp up. And, food. How am I going to feed my kids? Also, depression and hopelessness, like thinking I've already failed. That's a big depressive thing. Feeling worthless, helpless, hopeless. And hopeless is the worst one. And even feeling defeated. And when someone feels defeated, they actually will stop taking action. It's one of the worst things they could possibly do. Also, they could go into an identity crisis because a lot of people, especially men, look at their job as their identity. And so you could start to question things. And you have a fear of future failure, which could make you tough in interviews because you could think, oh no, what if they don't like me? Blah, blah, blah. So, there's real damage that comes from being laid off or fired. But just being laid off, we could keep out fired because at least then hopefully they gave you a reason. But being laid off is almost always because, oh, sorry, we just needed to cut. Yeah. And that sucks. So, yeah, safety and self-esteem are the two big things that are impacted. And that just almost always takes away everything. And then you start to talk to yourself. I must be a terrible person. I must not be very worthy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Did you do that, Brian?
No, but I did have
good.
my days like that I did feel defeated. That you're trying
defeated,
so hard.
Probably the worst one.
Yeah, and luckily it would be every once in a while, but I was pretty surprised with how I reframed everything and kind of just kept it pushing, kept moving forward, kept trying whatever I could to keep moving forward,
Good.
Which I thought was weird sometimes where I'm like, I don't know where this is even coming from that I'm having such a positive, like forward thinking kind of attitude about it.
Good.
But I'm grateful for it.
Good. Now, there are some things we've talked less about, which is actually the effect on other people. People who start to feel depressed, start to feel anxious, actually don't feel poor. They're not going to be out there on the town. They're going to withdraw usually. So they pull away from other people. They have less social support suddenly because a lot of our social support comes from work and our work friends. But we also don't have money to go out to the movies or do things or go out to dinner. It can also cause strained relationships at home, especially if there's one person who's saying, I need you to pay half the bills or I need you to pay all the bills, whatever it is. That person could the relationships can start to fray. And we saw a lot of that happening when people would lose factories, especially in the Midwest. And these people who had these great paying jobs suddenly were laid off. And the best job they could get was something like a Starbucks or fast food. It became really tough on relationships. And a lot of people then turned to substance use, which is what a lot of people don't know is there's a lot of that behind the opioid crisis. It's not just that they had a physical injury and were prescribed an opioid. A lot of people turned to it eventually in these impoverished areas. For different reasons. So it wasn't just the pain patients, but the pain patients were a big part of it. And other unhealthy coping. I think alcohol is probably the biggest one of all. Of course, pot, and then a bunch of other drugs. But yeah. I would say alcohol probably are the biggest one of all. Always the biggest. Yeah. So long-term effects on mental health, this can be the biggest one of all. This is probably the most unfortunate, is you can have a career paralysis. You could actually stop like your movements in your track or start to really doubt yourself. You can start feeling an imposter syndrome. Like, am I really good? Do I really have what it takes to do whatever thing I'm doing?
I mean, and that's very, like, that happens because I don't know exactly how to explain, like, the whole job market right now because...
I don't think anyone does.
Yeah. I mean, I have a good resume and, like, I can do so much that I was having a lot of issues with landing anything. And it wasn't me applying regularly. It was me having friends within companies like push my resume and everything up to like who needed to have eyes on it, and still nothing was happening.
I hear that so much. I hear that from my clients. I hear it from everyone. Yeah. I've not heard someone say, oh yeah, getting a job is easy. That is not the case.
But usually it would be.
It used to be.
Yeah. That I'm like, I don't know what's happening in the world exactly, that it's like it was.
Well, I think there's a lot of economic anxiety. I think that accounts for some of it. Mm-hmm. That a lot of workplaces now with tariffs, with the economy sort of unsure, with all these massive layoffs, prices soaring, and once we have big layoffs like this, it's going to have a ripple effect in the economy. You realize, I saw in the research triangle, Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, they're estimating 17,000 jobs lost just from the federal layoffs, like just right there. 17,000 people may not sound like a lot in a two-city combination. That's not the biggest area. And 17,000 people who now no longer have an income, 17,000 people who need a job and have to go find something, that's a lot of people. And it's going to have a ripple effect. Plus, it's going to be a big toll on the state economy because they have to file for unemployment. They have to get health care somehow. Maybe it'll come out of Medicaid, but now that's on the chopping block. So it's almost like the rug is being pulled out, and that's what's really scary.
From everyone.
From a lot of people, from the whole nation. It's one thing, too, because I lived here in California, and we had a big aerospace downturn. So that's, I think it was after the space shuttle and all this stuff. We were really big in aerospace. And all of a sudden, we lost all these jobs and a bunch of stuff happened. I don't know the whole why behind it, but all of a sudden there was a big downturn. Our real estate tanked. There was a bunch of stuff going on. But if you moved like up north or to another state, you were going to be okay. Or you just weathered it out here, which is what most people did, of course. It's pretty different when it's happening in the entire United States. That's what worries me a little bit more.
Yeah, because, I mean, what do you do? And if there's no funding, from the government, then what do you really do then?
So career paralysis, imposter syndrome, a loss of motivation, which again is that defeated feeling, and that's probably one of the hardest of all. By the way, the biggest mistake people make with motivation is thinking they need to feel motivated to take action. You don't. That's what most inaction is tied to, a belief that you need to be motivated. So I can only say is if you feel unmotivated, don't let that stop you from taking action. Motivation is just a very helpful little kick. It's sort of like having caffeine in the morning to give you a little more energy. But if you don't have your caffeine and you have a big old caffeine headache because you're going through withdrawal, you can probably still drive to work. I mean, you can still do things.
Sometimes you have to force yourself.
Sometimes you have to force yourself.
If you don't want to, I mean, do whatever you need to do to take a moment to, soothe that feeling that you're feeling, and then get back up and push through. And then once you stop, you stop.
Right. And then there are going to be people, I hate to go into PTSD here, but sometimes there will be people who will have to deal with it. I would think it'd be a small amount, but it is a threat to their livelihood and maybe their family's livelihood. And if it has a traumatic effect, then it could possibly do that. I can't say for anyone's individual story on that one. It could also have the opposite effect, where people use basically that grain of sand to make a pearl, to use a oyster reference. So coping strategies and psychological resilience. Number one, if you're laid off, acknowledge the emotional impact. I think this is one of the most important things. Be able to say to yourself, that sucks. I hate that. Don't give yourself platitudes like, if you feel sad, feel sad. If you're angry, feel angry. Just be what it is. It'll help you to process the emotion. 2, reframe the experience. Sometimes it's helpful to look at that, although you're very upset and disappointed, maybe the new administration's not a place you want to be working. Maybe they don't share your same goals. Maybe you want to do something more aligned with your goals somewhere else. And it might take some time, but you want to be able to look at that. Yeah, it was as best you can do. Always, too, when you're depressed, set small achievable goals. I almost said unachievable. What is that? No, achievable. Small little goals. Every goal that you set, feel like you've accomplished something.
Even if it's one thing a day, honestly. Yeah, because sometimes you are so defeated that you don't want to do that one simple thing that you had, that
is true.
To do.
One thing a day.
But if you can force yourself to do that one productive thing, it'll help.
Actually, something I often do with clients is I have them make their to-do list, and sometimes it's god-awful long, and then I have them take a Post-it and write 3 things on there. And I say, that's your to-do list. Do that. Do each one until it's done. Then you're done with that Post-it. Then go add 3 more, like to another Post-it.
Because I love Post-its. I put them on my wall all the time. And it's nice because once I pull it off, it's such a satisfying feeling to
yes,
rip it off and be like, it's done,
And you know who invented Post-its?
Yes.
Romeo and
movie,
Michelle?
Yeah.
Yes. Do you know that, Noah?
No. It's,
Noah.
I'm telling you, old people stuff.
It's Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion? What is it called?
Yeah, but I don't know the movie like that. I watched it once.
It is truly, I want to say,
knows it.
A work of art and a must-see, because you see 2 incredibly positive young women who live by Venice Beach and go to their high school reunion and tell everyone they invented Post-its. And all the fallout goes from there. So anyway, okay. And then seek social support. Don't disconnect from other people. Financial planning also. That's a big thing. I'll stop at that. And develop new skills if you have to. Like if you're working in the coal industry, you can keep working in the coal industry, but see what you can do to develop other energy, perhaps. I hate to be so glib, but, other energy sources maybe, or something where there might be other jobs. That's not always easy to do. It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. Not always because it's impossible to teach the old dog new tricks, because the old dog kind of gets set in their ways. Like if you told me I couldn't be a psychologist and that I had to be something else.
A mechanic?
A mechanic! That's great. Because I'm terrible.
You have an electric car, so I don't know.
I have an electric car. I like it all behind a black box. So I have an electric car. So yeah, I would be a bad mechanic. And it might be a really tough slog for me. But if I had to go to law school, I probably would be okay with that.
And maybe it's a good time for people to go after a career they've always wanted.
Yeah.
They've never gone for.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I think to do that, that's a little later down the line. I think what you have to do with people is to say, first, deal with the emotions, deal with the processing, get your life in order, and then you can start to reorient yourself. It's not that other people, we can't just say, oh, look on the bright side. It's gonna take a little bit. Let's talk about the effects of an organization of mass layoffs. I like this because, and I really wanted to go into this, because a lot of people think the organization is better off for laying off people. That is not the case. It's really, sometimes organizations have to lay off people because otherwise the whole organization would fold. And sometimes they do it just because they want to do it to, increase their bottom line. Sometimes it's kind of haphazard, like we're seeing in the federal government. It looks pretty haphazard. It doesn't look like there's any plan. It looks like it's just like, that chainsaw like you saw Elon Musk use on stage. It looks like that is pretty much the plan. But I could be wrong. I just have never been given any information to refute that. Okay, so there's an immediate financial and operational impact. There is a cost savings generally because you're not paying people. And people are usually that's the biggest expense. But there could be severance and legal costs. Some people will start to bring it to court. So you start to have to go into court, and that costs a lot more money than paying them. And you might have to pay them back pay plus. And but people don't realize there's often a disruption in the workflow. Like whatever's happening will either stop happening or it'll really cause other problems. Like when Twitter had layoffs, they had increased workloads and tons of technical failures. Do you remember when they had those technical? You couldn't even use Twitter there for a bit. It was it was non-functional. Well, it's kind of half non-functional now, but now it's just. It's like going to a once really cool resort and finding out it's been graffitied and taken over by the natives or something. I mean, that sounds awful, doesn't it? I was trying to be, that sometimes things can fall into disrepair. So, effects on remaining employees. There's survivor syndrome. Guilt. Survivors feel bad for the laid off employees, and they do. I remember being on that side of it, being on the survivor syndrome, and it had a profound effect on the entire organization I was with. Like people talked about it, they felt bad about it. That was one of the biggest things. Also, increased stress and burnout. There was more work on fewer people. That was a big thing. Also, job insecurity and fears. Once you see that happen and you see people getting marched out, you know that your job really isn't safe. Maybe that's part of the plan. But that job insecurity actually makes you start to worry about working there, and had me at least looking for another job.
Well, yeah, it shows that the company doesn't really care about their employees as much, and they can just discard them whenever they feel like it.
Well, I think if you're going to do it, you got to do it a particular way. Like the Wicked Witch said with Dorothy's shoes, these things must be done delicately. So also a loss of trust in leadership. You start to think that they're not telling you the truth always, and it erodes morale. There is a way to deal with that for managers. Stay tuned. Maida's layoffs actually led to distrust and low morale. And a lot of people, I don't know who's left at Maida, but we've had a lot of public examples of people who've worked there who are, saying very negative things about the organization. There'll be a decline in productivity. Often after a layoff, there's lower employee engagement. Like you don't want to do things. Like if you stayed, would you want to do stuff?
No. And then sometimes the people that get laid off are the fun ones. And then now work is super boring.
The fun ones.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, possibly. Also, the brain drain, not having people who have institutional knowledge. One thing I learned when I worked at a very large organization that had like employees from day one of this organization, had been around about 20 plus years at that point, is that there were employees who had so much knowledge. They weren't the top employees, but they were some of the most valuable employees. So they actually, when I could go to those people and say, how does this, what happened here, and da-da-da, that institutional knowledge ended up being a really helpful thing for me. Also, fear stifles creativity. But guess what? When you're fearful, you don't want to take risks. Duh. So when you have a fearful organization, people aren't going to want to do it. IBM did this. You guys don't know IBM. They were like, IBM used to be like I don't know, who's the big tech person today? Google? Mm-hmm. Like, they were like the Google of the time. They were hot. They were the Apple. They were the Microsoft. IBM was this company. It was early computers. They had layoffs in the 1990s. They lost a lot of their top engineers, and their innovation completely slowed. And that company went from being on top to just kind of going to relegated to kind of the back of the line. I mean, we still have IBM, but it's just wherever it is.
I've seen them do stuff with fashion.
No.
Yeah, like in some fashion designs, like, yeah, they work together with fashion designers, but other than that, I don't really know.
Well, good for them. I'm glad they're taking a new tack. Also could have a negative cultural and brand impact. Toxic workplace culture could develop. There could be reputational damage. This is what I think about the federal workforce. A lot of people take those jobs. They don't pay as much as private. So you take those jobs because number one, you want to do something to give back. Number two, because you want job security, which these jobs used to have. We used to think of federal jobs as pretty secure, like among the securest jobs. I would have said that 6 months ago. I would absolutely said that. Also, they have great retirement benefits. So these people know that they'll be able to work, give back to the country that they believe in, and be able to retire and have these lives. And now that question is out the window. So loss of customer trust too. There's been so much brand damage to the federal government, this constant maligning, saying how bad they are, with people who are usually saying it don't usually know what they do. Did you have a negative view of the federal government, Brian?
More like I understand how it works.
Well, you worked in one of the branches.
Yeah.
Which was, you worked in the military.
Yeah. And I just, it has its quirks, I would say.
Well, it's a huge behemoth, and there are many parts of the organization. But in general, it works. It just may not always work great, and there's certain parts of it. That's what's so weird about this. They could have done things right. Clinton did this right. They got all the organizations. I think I have a graph about the workforce, and it's kind of held about the same number across time. We see a dip in that in the 90s because Bill Clinton's administration with Al Gore, they actually set forward to cut a lot of the federal workforce. And when they cut is when the organization went down, but they didn't cut like they're doing now. They cut by going in and doing assessments and talking to the managers and doing plans and doing hiring freezes, all kind of the normal things you do. And eventually there's attrition, and eventually you cut where you can, and you start to really reduce the federal workforce. So now, even though our population has grown, we've kept the workforce pretty much the same across time, except during years of the census when we do hire extra people. But in general, it's been okay. Google in 2023 had layoffs that led to an employee backlash and criticism. Employees did not like that. Google used to be like a cool place to work.
Well, yeah, I think Target got a lot of backlash lately. People are telling people just not to shop at Target.
Well, I don't think they're doing it for layoffs. They're doing it for the DEI.
Well, yeah,
thing.
But still.
Target and everyone's like, you know what? You got to love. You know who you got to love is Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, do you guys know who he is? He's the like billionaire investor. He is one of the great minds of investing. He's kind of pulling out of the market right now, which is really interesting. And it's kind of worrying a lot of people. Like, what does he see? Like, is the market starting to, he's starting to pull a lot of cash reserves. But the other thing that's very interesting about him, he loves two companies quite a bit. One is not Target. It's, guess what? What company are you told to shop at besides Target?
Instead of Target?
Yeah. He loves Costco.
Oh, Costco.
And he said they have a great organization and they treat their employees well. And he looks at good organizations. The other one he loves, American Express. Oh. He probably loves quite a few more, but those are two major organizations that do have DEI, that are standing up to this. And it's interesting that they're also financially the better off organizations. You can't be fickle with this stuff, So it's kind of interesting.
Makes sense.
I'm not a financial person. I just find it interesting. That's me. So you could have a weakened competitive edge, essentially, and have trouble rehiring. I mean, who's going to want to, what good persons, if you get offered two jobs, do you take the job with the federal government where you might be laid off when the next administration comes in? Or do you take the job in the private sector where you also could be laid off, but it's not going to be willy-nilly as much?
Yeah. And if they've laid off people before already, it's like I would rather go to the safer option.
Microsoft had layoffs in the early 2000s, and that slowed its ability to compete with Google and Apple. And Microsoft, not that they've been catching up, but they kind of have. I mean, they're kind of just not they were the first big microcomputer, but, now we look other places a lot. I think Microsoft's still good. I still like them.
Yeah, well, they're good.
I have a friend, though, who's talking about an effect. So there's the organizational effects, which we talked about. We talked about the personal effects. But I have a friend who has a contract with NIH, and she's a scientist at UCLA. And she this morning wrote me a text. She was kind of talking about how she's so worried about this. And if you could put the first quote up there. I'm going to read the thing that's top of mind now is the prospect of having to close our labs. NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health, has stopped reviewing grants and has stopped approving new ones, and we won't have funds to pay our staff if this goes on too long. We're taking it day by day, trying not to project too much into the future, but this is top of mind. She's a scientist. And she's a scientist. She has a big lab. She has other scientists. She has grad students. She pays workers who, won some at the front desk. But this is, I wish I could tell you her project. I don't feel like it would be right. But she's doing extremely important work on a disease that is fatal. And they've made huge advances. So this is some of the most important, and it specifically deals with children. So this would be, if you got it into the public more, perhaps a little more popular, because these are children who, are really dealing with a fatal illness. But it is also something that, again, this willy-nilly approach is not really concerned with. She also goes on to say, something the public doesn't appreciate is how difficult and expensive it is to develop any drug. Most drugs fail because of unanticipated things like toxicities or off-target effects. So the consequence of stalled research and development won't be felt for years. It is almost impossible to regain momentum once the research is stopped. The effect on medicine is going to be huge.
That's scary.
And this is just a personal communication. She didn't know I'd put these quotes in. I'll have to tell her later. But I thought they were extremely important statements coming from someone who really knows.
And do you think anything is going to get better anytime soon?
No.
Got it.
I don't know. Maybe it will. I'd be thrilled.
But
I'm rooting for things to get better. But I'm not seeing any signs on the horizon.
Okay.
But I'm always surprised that some people just are so hopeful. I saw I love economy because economy is psychology in practice. And this economist was saying on something I was on Piers Morgan. Why do I watch that? I don't know. Just I'm a glutton. But he said, this guy, British economist, really smart, said, they go, what's the one thing to do to make things better? And he said, tax work less, tax wealth more. Now, if you know the ins and outs, that's as pithy as it comes, and that's succinct, but it also calls into, we tax workers a huge amount, and people who are wealthy get taxed at a much lower amount. But he's saying tax work less, tax wealth more. Well, the person that was there to counteract him said, no, that's not possible. What are you saying? And they just kind of went into a tizzy, but had no facts. But just kind of went into a tizzy. So it kind of made me think there are always people for another side, even if something is very easy. Like there is an easy solution, but people who have wealth are funding the government. One of them bought basically the last election and is now there with a chainsaw. Yes?
No, I'm just saying, because it's crazy. You see that there's so much stuff that we all could do to better our world, but there's people always fighting against that.
We could. Noah, what could we do to better our world? Do you know?
I've got no ideas. I'm just an intern. Stop littering.
Well, you're
recycle.
That's what being an intern is. We want to listen to your ideas. How organizations can mitigate negative effects, transparent communications. I'm going to go into that. Give support for laid off employees, not being done at the federal level. Support for remaining employees, rebuild trust in the culture, and have strategic workforce planning. You've got to care about everyone, both the ones you let go and the ones you're keeping on. So to transition a big reduction. There's actually research done. I'll just do it real quickly. Penn State did a great research study. They found that active listening by managers, Penn State, by the way, great university. They found active listening by managers can improve employees' sense of control and anxiety. The study was conducted only with large corporations experiencing layoffs, so perhaps not immediately applied to the federal workforce. But what's the difference? They're still organizations. Let's go into active listening really quickly. Active listening involves 3 elements: attention, comprehension, and acceptance. Attention is engaged body language, like you're sitting looking at them, making eye contact with them. That's attention. Comprehension is restating concerns. A good, easy, quick note, all you need to do is repeat their words back to them. You don't even need to rephrase it. If they say, I hate coming to work because there's no parking. Oh, you hate coming to work because there's no parking. I'm sorry to hear that. Like, that's it. That can be as simple as it needs to be. And also acceptance. Be open to employees' viewpoints. Don't argue with them. If they hate coming to work because there's no parking, find out what's going on. Those 3 steps can really make a huge difference. Employees will feel more valued and supported when actively listened to. You don't even have to solve the problem if they believe that you understand the problem. I do believe that that sometimes people win elections because other people feel understood, even though the solutions didn't match. There you go.
Makes sense.
So helps employees feel in control. They feel a safe space, and it shows employees that hard work is still valued despite layoffs. And managers need to also observe their own reactions during these uncertain times. They're people too. They are dealing with things, and they're usually being told what to do. Layoffs usually don't come from the managers. They come from higher ups. A shift in listening quality sends a strong signal to employees that you care, and managers can support workers even when layoffs are beyond their control. Most of the time they are. So, final thoughts. The mindset shift. Successful people have faced job loss. It happens over and over again. I used to have a cartoon on my refrigerator at home that I used for inspiration because I faced a lot of difficulty. And it was basically this little cartoon of this guy getting up after he got tripped. And it said, success is not measured by how many times you fall down, but by how many times you get back up again. And I was like, oh my God, that's great. The key shift is from why did this happen to me to how can I use this to grow? And that there's usually a little bit of a journey to get there. Yeah.
No, I mean, I was pretty happy in the big picture of it from getting laid off. Like, I was miserable. So for me, I'm like, oh, it's for a reason. Like, I'm going to go into a better job, you know?
Right on. I love that. But if you are experiencing a layoff and you're still experiencing a lot of crisis, there is the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. That just dial 988 if you're in the United States. 3 little numbers, 988. It's a 24-hour per day, 7-day a week, free and confidential crisis helpline for mental health support. Or you can go to 988lifeline.org to chat with the counselor, or text 988 if you cannot, you don't know how to operate a computer or a telephone. I'm kidding. But some people prefer texting. Oh, thank you, Noah. You put the graphic of 988 up. I really appreciate that. But that brings us to the end of the show for today. A reminder to like, subscribe, give us 5 stars. Links to the studies go to the YouTube page, youtube.com/Dr. Greg. Also, if you have questions and topics, hit us up at Ask Dr. Greg. This is Dr. Greg, Brian, and Noah saying farewell. Until next time, be present, be flexible, and be kind.